So you found yourself in a catch-22. In one corner, there is a trans person. In the other is a 54-foot schlonged Polak ginger midget trap. Tread lightly, my young Padawans. If you disagree with either of us, you might just come off as a bigot.
No. No.
You have been warned. Let the demonetization process begin! Ha! You know, it's ironic. The night before I wrote this week's episode for today in the recap of the Ghost Golf Kumite, I had just said something akin to what is essentially,
I've never done a Riley J. Dennis video, and honestly, I don't feel like it's absolutely necessary for a Riley J. Dennis video to be on my channel.
well, the very next day Riley posted this video. And so we're doing this. Against my better judgment, yes we are.
You know how sometimes people say something and there's a meaning beyond the literal interpretation of their words?
You know how sometimes people say something, and sometimes people have different perceptions of how they view that thing that was just said?
It's like if there's context or history or tone or something else behind their words.
Like if there's context or history or tone or something else behind their words. Keep that in mind at the forefront of your head spaghetti monster for future reference, my people.
Like if I come up to you and say, that's a nice shirt, you can probably detect that I didn't actually mean that that's a nice shirt.
Based on tone and nothing more, correct? Lack of context and history and that something else.
Or maybe you and I are on a mission where we have given someone the codename of Hawk. When I say, the hawk is in the nest, you probably know I'm not talking about a literal hawk. I'm saying that the person has arrived.
So here we have an instance of preemptive determination, i.e. history. Yes, we do. But you're only telling half the story, aren't you, Riley? You see, a person can explicitly mean something as they say something. However, the way that that is meant to be interpreted is kind of in the wind the moment you've said that thing, or it's been published, or what have you. You see, this is the tricky bit. Everyone's perception of reality is vastly different from that of their brother, neighbor, teachers, work buddies, etc. There's nothing wrong with that on the surface. However, in the famous and amazingly profound words of Neil deGrasse Tyson, that's sarcasm, by the way. I would have thought that that was a concept that was obvious for anyone with even half a functioning frontal cortex. But wouldn't you know it, we are talking about perceptions and how some people can misinterpret things grossly, so I think a disclaimer is definitely in order. Almost all armed conflict in the history of the world came about because opposing sides believed different things to be true. Who would have thunk it? War is brought on by disagreement. I am shook. Now for an example of what I was just talking about. One of the more hilarious instances where the hindsight and interpretations of someone's work more than miss the mark come in the form of J.J.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. Some people have taken to the idea that Tolkien's representation of the different races, such as elves, such as dwarves, men, hobbits, and such, are a representation of actual races and cultures to be found amongst our reality. For instance, that the dwarves portrayed in the epic 1,178-page quest adventure about doing away with the one true ring to rule them all were an allegory for that of the Jews. Or that the orcs were meant to be an unflattering metaphor for dark-skinned people. But you see, the irony in asserting and portraying that claim upon Tolkien's work, however, is that the man utterly despised allegory to his core. Quote, I cordially dislike allegory in all of its manifestations and always have done so since I grew old and weary enough to detect its presence. I much prefer history, true or feigned, with its varied applicability to the thought and experiences of readers. I think that many confuse applicability with allegory, but the one resides in the freedom of the reader, and the other is the proposed domination of the author. So we've established that interpretations of work take on a will of their own after they are divorced from their author, regardless of whether there be any merit to those interpretations or not. However, the ironic bit about this video, Riley, is that throughout it you use a phrase's original intentions and that of the perceptions currently, that is, of a select few people's perceptions. But you use those two divorced phenomena interchangeably as if they are the same, and that simply won't do.
When we use language, we very often mean stuff beyond the literal interpretation of our words. When I say it's raining cats and dogs, I don't actually mean that pets are falling from the sky.
We get it. You're done making your point. Words have meaning. Move on already. Not all good things come in threes. Least of all your oversimplified analogies of slightly more complicated concepts. This is why I don't make Riley response videos, honestly, guys.
So, with all of that in mind, it's important to know that the phrase, "it's okay to be white," is racist as shit.
Based on what, exactly?
I know it may sound innocent to some of you, but it's a dog whistle. It's a phrase that would fly under most people's radar, but would signal to a certain group of people, in this case, white supremacists, that the person saying this phrase is one of them.
So what I'm hearing is that the perception of the minority faction of people who hear a phrase actually dictates its deeper meaning to the whole? No, I'm sorry. That's not how society works. Meanings of things do not adhere to the minority group of people's notions of them, Riley.
The phrase, "it's okay to be white," recently gained notoriety thanks to the garbage can of the internet, 4chan.
You see, Riley, it's saying stuff like that eggs them on. They live for that kind of infamy. You should know this by now.
White nationalists and neo-Nazis on that site.
There's a fallacy term for what you're doing right now, but for the life of me, I can't seem to put my finger on it at present. I'm sure it'll come to me eventually in the form of some convoluted plot device I use later on in the video to make it slightly more interesting for the viewers.
Designed the phrase specifically to try and piss off people on the left and make white people look like victims.
So what I'm hearing is that you have enough of a direct in with these people and that you can safely affirm their political beliefs. I'm going to need some heavily supported evidence to actually believe you when you make a claim such as this.
They wanted a phrase that could embolden white nationalists while appearing innocent to the average person.
Are you sure? Are you doing that thing that I talked about earlier where you're interpreting for the originator what exactly their own intentions were without the full context? Riley? Regardless, that's very naughty of you to do, Riley. It means you didn't actually do your homework. Because you see, in the actual 4chan thread where this whole situation originated from, the intentions were actually quite well established for all to see. You only had to look. If only you had Googled a tad bit more than a simple Wikipedia link. The point is that to have maximum contrast between how evil the media portrays these posters and how clearly benign they are to normies. Do not alter the poster. Uniformity is key. It will have the biggest impact. A watermark or URL is not to be added. Ignore shills whining, trying to ruin the operation by adding watermarks to far-right sites. Patrol your neighborhood and take these down if you see them. Now, Riley, this doesn't really support what it is you're trying to propagate on your channel now, does it? Which means that you're either a fool or a disingenuous twit. Either way, I wouldn't want to be in your shoes. But continue.
They wanted to make the public sympathetic to their imaginary cause of white people as a group being oppressed. They desperately wanted to be victims. And frustratingly, they've kind of succeeded. Flyers with the phrase have been plastered around colleges in the US. Some asshole was actually paid money to give an "it's okay to be white" speech at the University of Connecticut. And white nationalist Tucker Carlson cried about it during his segment on Fox News.
There's that phrase again, white nationalist. I don't think that means what you think it means, Riley.
But this phrase actually has an even deeper history than just racist asshats gathering on 4chan.
Oh dear me, I am Leshouk. Also, Riley, would you please enlighten me as to what the Wikipedia article says about the historical context of the phrase, "it's okay to be white"?
Pop quiz. Can anyone define for me what the fallacy poisoning the well means? Not these yokels.
Poisoning the well, or attempting to poison the well, is a type of informal logical fallacy where irrelevant adverse information about a target is preemptively presented to an audience with the intention of discrediting or ridiculing everything that the target is about to say.
Very good, me off camera. Also, while you're testing your knowledge of the world, can anyone tell me what foreshadowing means? Anyone? Anyone?
To show or indicate beforehand. Prefigure.
Ah, thank you. And finally, to round off this pop quiz, can anyone tell me what dramatic irony entails?
A literary technique originally used in Greek tragedy by which the full significance of a character's words or actions are clear to the audience or reader, although unknown to the character.
Very good.
The Anti-Defamation League has found much earlier usages of the phrase.
Oh, the ADL. Sorry about that. You mean the same Anti-Defamation League that neglected to recognize the Armenian genocide for what it was, genocide? That was until August 21st, 2007 in a press release. Oh, and then opposed congressional movements to recognize it as such from then on. You see, I can selectively take from Wikipedia articles too, Riley. But anyway, you were saying about the ADL.
Including in a 2001 song by a white power band.
So a song from a white power band.
In white supremacist flyers from 2005.
Some flyers from 2005.
And a KKK member tweeted the phrase in 2012.
And a tweet, you say? Well, pack it up, time to go. Can't argue with that astute logic. It's just pinnacle. I have nothing with which to combat that with. Woe is me. Dead. What are you guys still doing here? The video is done. You can go home. Fine. Except that those three things combined hardly make a mantra or a movement, you feel? But since you brought it up, I feel no qualms about what I'm going to get into next, which, if I lived in England, would get me into some deep shit. Anyway, Riley, your argument is essentially that because certain people with racist affiliations prior to its modern day uses have used the phrase, it's okay to be white, that on its own makes it racist by default. That you can't retroactively change the meaning of anything, even under the banner of something like a movement. You sure you want to play that argument?
If this is your first time coming across the phrase, just know that it isn't the first time for Nazis and white nationalists. For them, it's somewhat of a slogan. It's a way for them to make themselves politically correct in a world that rightfully wants them to fuck off. It's just like, if you consider yourself to be against racism, then you should probably want to distance yourself from a phrase that has deep roots in white supremacy and neo-Nazism.
Oh boy, what's that I hear? Learning time with Weeb. Now, this is what is referred to as a swastika. I'm sure you're familiar with it, Riley, but did you know that this symbol is at least 5,000 years old? And its earliest appearances puts its origin around 3000 BCE, right smack dab in the Indus Valley. And according to Zoroastrian religion of Persia, it symbolizes revolving sun, infinity, and or continuing creation. It's also very common on Mesopotamian coins, and also in the Bon faith of Tibet, Chinese Taoism, in Buddhism, Hinduism, Jainism, etc. I could go on, but you get the point.
But
You say because you think you're clever.
swastikas are not words.
Right. Unless you neglect to realize that the swastika flipped both ways is a variant of the character for Juan in Mandarin. Juan in Mandarin. And even if you neglect that, what are words if they're not symbolic of things with broader meanings, i.e. a symbol? Now, I will be rounding this out in a minute. Give me a sec.
Like, okay, literally word for word, with no context, it's okay to be white is true. But knowing that it has more meaning behind it, knowing that it's a racist dog whistle, that should be enough for you to say, no, fuck this, fuck that phrase, it's racist and I don't want to have anything to do with it.
So, my point from earlier with regards to the swastika, if we are to follow Riley's logic that words, phrases, etc., and anything with deeper meaning only meant what they were originally meant to mean by various people in a certain time frame, we'd find ourselves stuck in a rut mentally. Because that would mean that the swastika is not actually a general hate symbol or a neo-Nazi symbol in the slightest, as is present on the ADL's website. Rather simply one of creation, which would mean that my school would have to put back the wall. They actually took down a wall that had a swastika on it from like 200 years ago. That's how old my school is, and also how fucking stupid my school is. But that's a different story for an entirely different date, whatever. It takes someone willfully ignoring context and history to make such an assertion, don't you think, Riley? I mean, if the ADL says it's so, it must be true. I mean, that's all the context you need, right, Riley? So that means that anytime you use 100%, 9%, the numbers, 12, 13, 14, 14, 23, 14, 88, 18, 23, 28, 318, 38, 43, 511, 737, 83, 88. You're essentially being a white supremacist, just because all those numbers and percentages have such an affiliation, according to the ADL. You see how ridiculous this game is, Riley. Do you still want to play with me?
It's really not that hard. Don't give these people the time of day. Don't get into an argument about whether or not it's okay to be white, because that's not the discussion. Literally nobody is saying that it's not okay to be white.
Obviously, you haven't been paying close attention then, Riley. October 31st, 2017. White sociology professor, it's racist for whites to have mixed-race children. December 17th, 2016. Social media rant, spokeswoman for DC public schools says abolish white men. November 11th, 2017. Can my children be friends with white people? May 30th, 2017. Why I'm no longer talking to white people about race. March 18th, 2018. Should white people pay more for lunch? New Orleans chef tests social experiment. September 1st, 2017. Kill all white people. Did a suspect Kansas City killer target middle-aged white men? November 13th, 2017. Letter. It's not okay to be white. So, would you like to walk back that statement then, Riley?
We're only saying that the phrase, it's okay to be white, is racist as shit.
According to you and the ADL.
And what's frustrating about this is that the racists who hide behind this phrase know that context matters. They know exactly what bullshit they're pulling. Because when they see the phrase Black Lives Matter, they infer a whole lot of context about that phrase.
You are perfectly well and open to have your own interpretations of various movements, groups, phrases, and such. It's fine. But you have to know this. You are not the authority on all things interpretation, and neither is the ADL. However, I think you'll find in this instance that you are trying to be, and that's going to backfire on you in more than one way.
Because taken literally, Black Lives Matter literally cannot be offensive. It's just a statement of fact, and if you disagree with it, you're saying that Black lives don't matter, which would be a really shitty thing to argue. But conservatives and white nationalists are often offended by the phrase Black Lives Matter because the context they take from that phrase is, and therefore, white lives don't matter.
Again, that's one way of interpreting it, but as I have demonstrated in this video, you can't control everyone's interpretations of everything all of the time, and just because someone has a different interpretation of a slogan or a phrase than you, it doesn't mean that they're inherently wrong. It just means that they might look at it differently than you do. And if you're going to be a commentator on these sorts of things, it is within everyone's best interests if said person wishes to establish some manner of cohesive function amongst the different groups, for people to be open about the idea that other people view the world differently than you or I do. And that is an acceptable thing. Once you realize that the world isn't black or white, a lot of avenues open up. Because a person can think anything that they want. It only makes a difference when they act upon it.
That's why people get so offended over the phrase Black Lives Matter.
You see, again, you've made a broad generalization of people's opposing understandings of a phrase that isn't completely inaccurate, but isn't completely accurate either. And I'm sure you know that you're doing it, because you've just gone and talked about context and history and how it's important, but in this instance, happen to be divorcing both of these things from Black Lives Matter itself, all the while conflating the phrase Black Lives Matter with the movement Black Lives Matter. Because believe it or not, the movement and the phrase are two very separate ideas. Here are some reasons why people might not agree with the movement Black Lives Matter, but perhaps agree with the phrase Black Lives Matter. The movement Black Lives Matter has a distinct lack of focus on interracial violence, and they're associated with pro-Palestine and anti-Israel movements known as BDS, which stand for Boycott, Divestment, and Sanction of Israel. There are some criticisms of BLM that say that there is an insufficient focus on women. Need we discuss the violence committed by the movement in the pursuit of their goals? Seriously.
Because they infer context from it. But, important distinction here, the actual context behind Black Lives Matter is Black lives should matter, but currently they are not valued as much as other lives. So there's just no equivalency between the two phrases.
So, is this one of the frequent moments in your content where you've selectively decided which context is relevant and which isn't? Because I literally gave you context that spoke of the exact same issue with regards to white people. Yet somehow, as we'll see later on in this video, it's not quite the right context.
But I think this can demonstrate how people infer meaning from phrases that otherwise don't have a whole lot of meaning behind them because of context.
I'm retroactively starting a drinking game, so anytime in this video that Riley says the word context, take a fucking shot. I implore you.
For an example of how important context is, let's run through a hypothetical situation. Let's say you get coffee with your friend, and they say they'll pay for your drink in exchange for you paying for their drink next time. So you agree, and they pay for your drink. Now, a few days later, you both go to get coffee again. When you go up to pay, your friend is waiting for you to pay for their drink, but you don't. When they ask why you're not paying for their drink, you say, "Look, I only think it's fair that when we get coffee, we both pay for our own drinks. You shouldn't expect me to pay for your drink." You're ignoring all of the context that led up to that interaction. Because yeah, it would be weird if your friend just randomly expected you to pay for them. But there's history and context there. The people today who are saying it's okay to be white are the ones who ignore history and context and pretend that the phrase has no deeper meaning.
Funny how that works, huh, Riley?
They're the ones who don't give a shit that you paid for their coffee because that was in the past and has no bearing on what's happening now.
Interesting that you say that, because you also said earlier in this video,
"It's okay to be white" is racist as shit. I know it may sound innocent to some of you, but it's a dog whistle. It's a phrase that would fly under most people's radar, but would signal to a certain group of people, in this case, white supremacists, that the person saying this phrase is one of them.
which indicates that at least you're aware that there's only a select number of people who are cognizant of said context. Which means that either you're saying anyone who comes across this phrase and then regurgitates it unbeknownst to them that once upon a time some white nationalist might have used it in a tweet several years ago is a white supremacist by default. It seems like you might be jumping the gun a bit. And I'm sorry, but a tweet, a song name, and some flyers are rather obscure things that only the most militant white nationalists, or say a person and or organization with an axe to grind, would make sure to be aware of.
They believe everyone should pay for their own coffee, don't you? And don't try to muddy their argument by bringing in context.
Did I already discuss that the biggest reason as to why I've never done a Riley J. Dennis video isn't because Riley is low-hanging fruit, nor that Riley is a tired topic, but rather because of these stupid fucking analogies? I don't know what it is, they just piss me the fuck off.
Or like, imagine how annoying it would be to have a friend who just constantly says it's okay for them to do stuff that is obviously okay.
It's funny you say that, because Riley, I looked at your sources, in particular the one you cited from the ADL. The concept of the "It's Okay to Be White" flyers, a slogan often abbreviated as IOTBW, originated in discussions on 4chan and Discord in October. The idea was to create a flyer that had an ostensibly inoffensive phrase on it that would nevertheless be treated as racist by people who viewed it, particularly liberals or members of the media. Their subsequent overreactions would in turn ostensibly make those people lose credibility in the eyes of others and seem like hypocrites. How's about that for some context, Riley? What you don't get about context is that it can be checkered. But more than that, it can be altered in our minds and throughout time, whether for good or for bad. As I demonstrated with the swastika, there is no symbol with a universal meaning. Even our words can have more than one meaning in the dictionary, honestly.
Like you sit down to play Mario Kart and they go,
Nope, we're skipping the analogies, move on.
people who tell you that it's okay to play as Mario or wear shoes or be white, they already know that all those things are okay.
So like, Black Lives Matter, right?
And they know you know it too. They just want to provoke a reaction out of you. They want to start conflict where none exists. They want to be victims.
Wow, the lack of self-awareness is deafening.
And to have all the attention on them and how hard life is for them because they're not allowed to just state facts. The truth is, you're allowed to constantly declare that shit everyone knows is okay. But don't be surprised when everyone thinks you're an annoying piece of shit because of it.
Again, Riley with the self-awareness.
And one of the most ironic parts of this for me, just on a personal level, is that people constantly accuse me of always wanting to be a victim. But like, I benefit from white privilege. I'm not anywhere near being oppressed in terms of race. So when talking about race, I do anything but play the victim.
But Riley, are you the end-all be-all of representation for any and all members of the white demographic? Methinks not. You are one person, and you don't even rank as 0.0001% in terms of the population. Let's be real.
I admit that I am afforded benefits because of the color of my skin that people of color are not. That's an easy reality for me to accept.
And the reverse is also true. So fucking what?
But for tons of conservatives and white nationalists and neo-Nazis, they really just want to be the victim here. They want to manufacture outrage against white people so they can get sympathy.
Have you ever really talked to any one of them, though? Like, honestly, truly engaged with them on a personal level? Have you asked, do you know? How often do you engage with the other side?
They want people to feel bad for them just because they're white. Well, the time has finally come, and this is going to be fun to say. Suck it up, snowflakes. No one cares about your "it's okay to be white" flyers. Your desire to be a victim in a country that systemically favors you in every way possible is hilarious and saddening. It's time you accept the fact that you're not a victim. No one is saying it's not okay to be white, so stop acting like it.
Honestly, Riley, in terms of things you could have said, that was not the most ideal. If you like what I'm doing here on my channel, please consider checking out the Patreon, Maker, Teespring, and Amazon links in the description down below. If maybe you don't like my stuff that much, that's cool. You can always like, comment, share, and subscribe for more. Peace!